Hello guys, this is Mrs. Grella, and today we're going to learn about the quadratic formula. It's a third way of solving quadratic equations. If factoring is not an option or completing the square is too difficult. What we learned before today is that if you have an equation and you're using completing the square, and you have a coefficient of x squared, or in this case it's w squared, other than 1, like your a value in ax squared is other than 1, you would have to divide everything out by 4. The problem is that these numbers are not divisible by 4 and you'd be left with like a lot of fractions. So that might not be an ideal problem to use the completing the square with. It also might not be factorable. I'm not sure. I don't think this is factorable using the headphones method, and you'd kind of be stuck at that point and you wouldn't be able to solve it anymore. So that's why the quadratic formula is useful. It's useful for solving quadratics that are not factorable or really difficult to solve with completing the square. All right, so here's our quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now that seems like a lot, but think about what a, b, and c are. When a quadratic is in standard form, the a is the coefficient of x squared, the b is the coefficient of x, and the c is the constant value. And remember, it's set equal to 0. So your quadratics need to be in standard form before you solve them, just like when you're factoring. So if you take a look at this quadratic, for example, this is in standard form. I know that because it's set equal to 0, and I know that too because I can identify my a, b, and c very easily, and it's in order from highest to lowest exponent. So I'm ready to go with this one. If not, I'd have to set it equal to 0 like we learned previously. We'll do one example like that later, but for now we'll start with this one. So again, I don't think I can factor this. I don't want to divide everything by 4 because these are not divisible, and it'll create fractions for me, very difficult, annoying for me. So what I'm going to do instead is use my quadratic formula. All right, so my quadratic formula, I have to determine my a, b, and c. So a, remember, is the number in front of x squared, or in this case w squared, so that's 4. B is the number in front of the x, or in this case the w, it's 19, and c is the constant, which is 18. So determine your a, b, and c. A, b, and c are numbers, they are not variables. Once you do that, you substitute into the formula. All right, so x equals, so the first thing is negative b. Negative b really means the opposite of b. So if b is like negative already, you would make it positive. If b is positive, you'd obviously make it negative. It's the opposite. So in our case, our b is 19, so I'm going to do the opposite of b, which is negative 19. So that's my negative b. I put it in there. Plus or minus. All right, so just like with completing the square, you have plus or minus, so you do the same thing with quadratic formula. The square root of b squared minus 4ac. All right, so let's start with b squared. All right, b squared would be 19 squared. 19 squared would be what, guys? 19 times 19, not 19 times 2, 19 times 19. So that would give us 361. So that's your b squared minus 4ac. So 4ac means 4 times a times c. So 4 times a times c. Well, a is 4, so 4 times 4 times c is 18. I could figure out what that is later. All right, let's divide this all by 2a, so 2 times a, so 2 times 4. All right, so I just substituted my a, b, and c into my quadratic formula. What I'm going to do now, once that happens, is I'm just grabbing my calculator for a second. I'm going to figure out what is underneath the radical. All right, so don't put the square root in, just figure out what is underneath it, putting in what's under it. So I'm gonna basically type this into my calculator. All right, so I'm gonna figure out what that is. So 361 minus 4 times 4 times 18. So I want to figure out what that is. That's 73. All right, so that's really the square root of 73 there, because when I evaluate that, it gives me the square root of it gives me 73. So this whole thing becomes 73. Also, I can do 2 times 4. I can do that in my head, it's 8. But if not, I can just use my calculator and do it. So I want to also figure out what this is in the next step. All right, so I want to replace this with what it equals under the radical, and I want to replace this with what it equals. Now, at this point, that's pretty much my answer. All right, so what that means is that x is really equal to negative 19 plus 73 over 8, or x is equal to negative 19 minus the square root of 73 over 8. These are actually your answers. Well, what number is that? Again, I don't know exactly what number that is. I can find out approximately because it's irrational. The square root of 73 is not a perfect square. On delta math, I believe you can just put it in this. So this would be your answer based on delta math, but it really just means that these are the two answers. So these are my exact values. And again, using delta math, you can just substitute with the plus or minus. I think there's an option for you to do plus or minus there. Yeah, so I'm looking at delta right now, and they have the plus or minus option. So if I wanted to type my answer in, I would do, it was negative 19 plus or minus the square root of 73. Now we want to put that over 8. So we want to put the whole thing over 8. If you just do slash 8, it's going to just only go over the radical. That's not good. Remember, we want it the whole thing over the radical. The entire, the entire thing would be over 8 with the 19 as well. So one of two things. You can either, get rid of that. You can either put parentheses around what you just typed and then do slash 8. So now the whole thing is over it. So that's one option of how you could submit it. Or if you want, you can type the slash ahead of time and the fraction is already created. And then you can start to type in the top. I think this is the easiest way. Do the slash in the beginning. Type the top in, then arrow down to the bottom, and then type the bottom in. And then you don't have to use the parentheses. So that would be your answer. Let's just submit it and check and make sure that they like this. Yep, and that's correct. And they stopped there. The radical does not simplify. We'll get into that another day if it simplifies, what to do with that. But for now, these won't simplify. But really, that's what your answer is. But again, submit it on delta like this. If they want approximate values, which they might ask also, let's say, again, the nearest 10th or something, nearest 100th, whatever. Let's do nearest 10th. We did this with our completing the square. We would have to basically take our exact values and use our calculator. So here's the first exact value. Negative 19 plus the square root of 73 all over 8. So I would have to use my calculator to type that in. So to get a fraction, remember you do alpha y equals. Hit enter on n over d. And then type in negative 19 plus second x squared for the radical, 73, down arrow, 8. And then there's our decimal equivalent. So this is approximately negative 1.3, right? Because there's a 0 behind the 3, so it makes it stay a 3. So that would be your first approximate value. And then you would have to also use like the second answer with the minus sign and type that into the calculator. So what I can actually do is I can go up, hit enter, and then I can just basically edit this and change this plus to a minus to make it a little easier for myself. So this is negative 3.4, right? Behind the 4 is another 4, which would make it stay a 4. So negative 3.4 would be the other approximate value. So if they want exact values, you would leave this. It really means this, but you can actually use the plus or minus sign. But if you want approximate values, you have to take these, put them into your calculator and get decimals, and then round those decimals basically to what they're asking you to round them to. In this case was nearest 10th, that would be 1 decimal place. If it was, let's say, nearest like hundredth, remember that would be 2 decimal places, so it would be 30 or 31. So the 6 would make it go up to a 1, so 31 for that one, negative 1.31. And this would be negative 3.44 because the 3 behind it would keep the 4 a 4. It would not go up to 45. But it all depends on what they ask you to round to. All right, so that's the quadratic formula for you. That was the question that involved where it was already set equal to 0. What I want to do in the next video is show you how to do the quadratic formula when it's not set equal to 0. Just to review on how to set quadratic equal to 0 and put it in standard form.